This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon.
Sometimes you see a headline out of Lansing that makes you say, they're doing what up there? This week we had one such headline. State Rep Jim DeSana introduced articles of impeachment against our Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson. It's the kind of thing that doesn't happen every day in Michigan, even with our divided situation politically. So I thought it would be great to hear from DeSana himself to understand, where is this going? Is this a road to nowhere? What is it? What happens next? Jim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on, James.
Yeah. So what prompted this? Because, a lot of people might understand that Jocelyn Benson hasn't been super responsive to subpoenas. They might understand that, that we've had these illegal voters in Michigan. They might understand that there are certain problems with her, but what they might not get is what makes it rise to the level of impeachment.
I think the best way I can describe how it rises to impeachment is there's no controlling authority over Jocelyn Benson that's currently functioning. In many cases, it would be the Attorney General. She's bowed out. She's not going to correct or go after these violations of the statute. And then if we look at our Supreme Court, even though Jocelyn Benson has lost in court something like, I think it's up to 8 times now, the Supreme Court is not going to say, you have to abide by the statute. You are breaking the law. So right. We are the final relief. The representatives of the people are the final relief. And I know people get hung up. I think people get hung up on the word impeachment because it does have a negative connotation, right? Why are you impeaching somebody? I think that personally, me being a conservative, I think that impeachment is actually quite a positive thing that we should be doing more. We should be impeaching judges for not following the Constitution. Corruption would be rooted out by impeachment because the courts don't seem to want to handle any of this. They say we got to stay out of politics. So at the height of arrogance, and this is not in my impeachment, by the way, but the height of arrogance is Secretary Benson announcing that she's running for governor in the Secretary of State building in a clear violation of the law, clear violation of campaign election law. The Attorney General saying, yes, you broke the law, but guess what? There's no punishment. Right. And I think to myself, if I started raising money here in the Hob, the House Office building, and announcing that I'm running for re-election, I don't think I'd get that same kind treatment from Dana Nessel.
You could expect a strongly worded letter at a minimum.
Oh, I think I could expect police officers at my office.
Yeah, perhaps a knock on the door. Yeah.
So impeachment. There's 3 articles in this impeachment resolution, and we can go into the details about what each article and how the violations of statute and the violations of our Constitution have risen to this level, and no one is doing anything about it. Mm-hmm. Well,
I did notice something in Article 1, another one of those attention getters. The final bullet point there. Urge certification of the 2020 election despite serious concerns about the Wayne County canvass process. And I look at that kind of thing and I say, is that something that gives the Democrats what they want, which is now I get to pivot it away from what Jocelyn Benson did and say Republicans still have sour grapes over something that happened 5 years ago. I saw Rep. Kerry Reingans making that exact argument.
That is their entire talking point, is just to go back and talk about 2020. They love talking about 2020. They love calling us conspiracy theorists. And Jocelyn Benson said this is a clown show. It's all interesting because 2020 really is just a symptom of the problem. And when I say, it was even asked of me last night on Fox News, 2020 seemed to be the focus. And the problem is our election system has very little integrity to it. When you have a Secretary of State who issues a directive that says presumption of validity, so presume that the signature is valid. That's not in the law. Nowhere in fact, that is the antithesis of the law. The law is you do not presume it's valid. You would have to prove a signature is valid by verification. If somebody said, I think she's thinking of presumption of innocence.
Right.
Yes, that's in the law. But presumption of validity, that would be like you going across the border and saying, let's presume that he's who he says he is. No,
it's not how the world works.
Let's see his identification. Okay, yes, that's James DeSana. He's got his ID. Wait a second, this is fake. So no, and so when you get into these deep issues when it comes to our election, it goes back to 2022, 2024. And I'd really love to talk to you more about 2024 because people think, oh, life is good.
Yes.
2024 went great and everything was hunky-dory. It was not. We've still got the same problems when you have a corrupt Secretary of State that overlooks the law or actually tries to circumvent the law. What do you do? How do you fight this? How do you fight this as a conservative who believes in integrity, who strongly believes that everybody should have to prove who they are to vote? And it shouldn't be that difficult. I mean, when you vote in person, they look at you, they look at your ID, and they say, yes, that's you. We know that's you. It's all of the corruption and all of the, I believe, the fraud in our system would disappear. I know of a case in the township next to me that's being investigated right now of an illegal immigrant that voted. She's probably one of the 15 they're counting in the numbers. I don't know that because the Secretary Benson does not come forward with any information. Right. There should be investigations about how does this happen? But she seems to be, she's like, this is my domain. Don't come into it. It's like, wait a second. We make the laws that govern the elections and we're the lawmakers. You run the election and we make the law and the statute that governs the elections. And unfortunately, we've given it away in many cases, and it's been taken from us in many ways.
It's fascinating because what you're saying, you and I both know there's not going to be 2/3 Senate. You could not get 2/3 of Michigan senators to agree on a lunch order today, let alone to remove the Secretary of State from the party that's, it's a majority Democrat Senate.
Correct.
And so that's not what it's about, is ultimate removal. It's about using your recourse, the recourse allowed under our Constitution, to put an objection on the record to the conduct in office when the Attorney General wouldn't do it, the Michigan court system offers no recourse, and the Lansing media offers little. There's no accountability through any other avenue. So what you're saying is this is the tool we have left. We've done subpoenas. You could try to hold someone in contempt, but this is the tool we have available to signal to the public of Michigan the Secretary of State's office is not being run right.
And you say, I know in your earliest question, you said, why now? What's the timing? Well, we've been working on this for a long time. It's been slow going. Getting this written resolution back from the Legal Services Bureau has been an agonizingly slow process. And so we just said, listen, just print the articles. We want the articles back. We want to introduce the resolution. And so finally we've gotten it. And so Article 1 of the resolution speaks about a payment made to the Keep Kyra Harris Bolden for Justice Committee 4 months before Secretary Benson had a court case, O'Halloran versus Benson, in front of the Supreme Court. And so $82,500 from Secretary Benson's PAC to Kyra Harris Bolden. Some might say, she's a Democrat. They're both Democrats. They're going to give money to each other for their reelection. I think that's really corrupt to give a Supreme Court justice that amount of money before your arguments are heard in front of the Supreme Court on a case that was you were ruled against. They ruled against her at the Court of Appeals, Circuit Court, and then in the state Supreme Court reversed most of it.
I would actually think it might be more appropriate to have a social custom that the chief elections officer should not be a donor to campaigns. It just doesn't make sense.
I would agree with you. I think that only individuals should be able to make donations to campaigns and not circumvent that through PACs, so that if the individual limit is $12.50, then you could give $12.50. But certainly as an officer running our state elections, you have a PAC where you can give that amount of money. Think of the amount of opportunity for corruption.
Absolutely.
So another bullet point in Article 1 is, so you have the right to carry a firearm. You have the right to open carry or conceal carry.
Mm-hmm.
You just happen to be walking down the block past the let's say you're walking past the Taylor City Hall where the early voting is, and you happen to have your gun with you. Well, Jocelyn Benson decided that she had the sole authority to ban firearms within 100 feet of a polling place. I'm sure glad that she feels she has that authority, because I think that authority was granted by the U.S. Constitution, and it says you have the right to defend yourself. So this directive, 100 feet within a polling place on election day, and election day with early voting is
right
9 days. So a clear violation of our U.S. Constitution. So that's in there. And you mentioned in 2020 about her recommendation to certify the results. That's in there. Article 2 talks about the electronic poll book and the QVF and how they differ. And we cannot get any information from Secretary Benson regarding this because she has obfuscated and refused to give any information. The deletion of the audit trail. This is a big one.
Please talk about this one. This blew my mind to see this.
Yeah. Following the election, on the 7th calendar day following the final canvass and certification, she's destroying records. She's destroying records from the election. So the audit trail is gone. We can't even audit this because she's destroying. And federal statute says you must save all records related to the election for 22 months. So all
is
records,
what she did even legal under Michigan law?
She may feel like under her authority, she can, since she's the chief election officer, that she can do that. I don't see that in the statute that she has. So the federal law is the supremacy through the supremacy clause, overrules anything Michigan would have. But in Michigan law, I'd have to check that. We haven't put that in there. We haven't mentioned that. We're just really referring to the federal statute in a federal. I mean, every 2 years we have a federal election. It's
Do you
either
think the Trump team is aware of that?
Yes. Yeah. And I believe there are some things going on behind the scenes. I'm not privy to that, but destroying records, elimination of the audit trail, that's a serious offense. We can't go back in and audit because the records, I mean, changing the qualified voter, changing voter history. When you change voter history every month, you change the records from the election. So we can't even audit. My county clerk told me on another instance, she goes, Jim, we cannot even audit that vote now. And I'm like, it's amazing what we cannot do when we're supposed to have the ability to see how do we know for sure that we have integrity in our elections. Mm-hmm. We can't even go back and look and say, well, this is definitely a problem. No, it's all gone. We can't look into it. And certainly these training, and I'll go into a specific instance I want to mention to you. These training manuals and the instructions to the county clerks, the local clerks, she doesn't want to give that information up. Now that's not in my impeachment. That's not mentioned in the articles. But I had an incident in my township where a person showed up at the polling place, wanted to same day register, wanted to vote, was not registered to vote, was actually registered up in Bay City. She wasn't eligible to vote that day at my township, clearly by the law. The law and the rules combined, law and rules. She was under the 13 days. She brought a couple of pieces of identification, but she didn't have sufficient documentation. And so they told her she couldn't vote. Well, she called the Secretary of State and complained, and they got on the phone with the clerks and said, let her vote. And they said, this is against all of our rules. She's not eligible to vote here. And so David Tarrant, the chief security officer for Benson and the Secretary of State, backdoored into the computer, put her right into the qualified voter file. Her vote counted. It wasn't even a provisional ballot. It wasn't a challenged ballot. It was a ballot that went in that day as a qualified, as a completely legal ballot. And she was not eligible under any of the rules that the secretary had in place. And my county clerk and my township assistant clerk said, Jim, this goes against all of our rules. Why are we doing this? How can they do this? Does the law even matter? Why would we even have rules? And so it gets to really kind of the question of they constantly break the statute, break the rules. The rules are based on the statute. We want to see what the instruction is because we feel like they're breaking the rules from the statute, what they're telling these county clerks. And a lot of it has to do with verification, identification. We have a Secretary of State who has basically stepped in to threaten local clerks who want to question and be a little bit, I don't want to say suspicious, but a little bit meticulous about making sure that they balance and making sure that all of their votes are legal votes. I mean, the illegal immigrants voting or the immigrants voting in the case of in Ann Arbor is a clear example that we don't have any way of. The only way we knew that person from China voted was he came back and said, I voted. I want my ballot back.
Right. And
I think now in the court case, I think there was something I read the other day about him lying about the circumstances. It's pretty crazy. There was another circumstance I was telling you about where a woman who was here illegally, who was being deported, voted, and her husband wants the clerk to go in and prove that she didn't put the ballot in the tabulator. And my clerk says, I don't think I can prove that to you. The precinct balanced, her ballot's in the tabulator, it counted. And she lied when she applied when she registered to vote, because you declare that you are a U.S. citizen.
Right. And
then she also broke the law when she went in, got a ballot, and presented it to the polling place, into the tabulator. She broke the law twice. And how do we prevent this? How do we prevent this from happening? Obviously, our system is rife with the opportunity for fraud. And people say, well, Rep, how much evidence do you have? I'm like, how do I get evidence when the chief election officer has no interest in telling us, showing us the records, showing us what their instructions are to clerks? How do you root out fraud when they're telling them, go put them let them vote. You just let them vote. They're good. Don't stop somebody from voting. Well, what if they're not eligible to vote? I want to make sure that we don't have a person an eligible illegal ballot. And by the way, we could go deeper into this, but we feel that this is the tip of the iceberg. It really is. Going into 24, even in 22, the opportunity for fraud when it's all by mail and you say, presume their signature is valid. I mean, how many forensic signature experts do we have in every city to go over a signature? And how many people even sign their signature anymore today? They say, oh, that's his signature. I can check it to what was on his card. I don't think we have that ability. I think the only ability we have would be to have some type of traceability with identification. Like, okay, this is this person, and they had to bring their ballot with their ID to the polling place 30 days prior. I would allow for some circumstances where the person is not able to get to the township clerk's office or the township hall or your city hall. But everybody who votes lives usually within 3 to 5 miles of their city hall, their city clerk's office. It wouldn't be difficult. Like, let's say you're going on vacation for 2 weeks. You want to vote absentee. Come on down,
Right.
Fill out a ballot, put it in, show your ID, fill out a ballot. You're good. There's your absentee ballot. Well, I'd like to mail it in. I'm like, there's no chain of custody that can exist when you mail a ballot through the post office. How many people are going to handle that ballot? How many opportunities would there be to say, oh, this is a ballot? It needs to go directly, in my opinion, it needs to go directly from the voter to the clerk to the tabulator. That's the only way I think we can have. That's the only way I think our elections can have integrity. But getting back to Jocelyn Benson, she flaunts the law constantly, and obviously by her statements, we know she does not respect the legislature at all.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't feel like any of our questions are valid, and so we're attempting to be that authority to say, hey, you thought that we have no authority. We do. And I would, to your point, I would love to see 58 members of our body vote that these articles of impeachment are valid and send it to the Senate and say, okay, what say you?
Right.
And they say, well, we don't really think this is that big of a deal. Really? You don't think breaking the law is that big of a deal? Then maybe you shouldn't be a senator. But because I
see, I see where you're going here. So basically, the thing behind the thing here is, not only does this kind of thing moves the Overton window. If she were to successfully be impeached and it gets sent to the Senate, that is a thing. For all the people who think nothing ever happens, that is a something. Impeachment would be, even without removal. I mean, because what did Democrats do after they impeached Trump? They knew he wasn't going to be removed, but then they beat you over the head with impeached. So you can't think that labels don't matter when your opposition clearly thinks that labels matter. And so an impeached Secretary of State would not be a good thing. But then the thing behind the thing sounds like you want to tie Benson and the Senate Democrats at the neck together. So you either, and they don't have to remove her, but you could, vote to convict and punish in some way, censure. But since they won't, whatever they're going to put on the record will be bad. And as an impeachment, they don't have the choice to not take it up. They have to handle it immediately.
They have to answer if we pass the articles of impeachment onto the Senate, they have to answer either by stating we will not hold a trial, or we will. They can't just bury it. They can't just say we're going to ignore your articles of impeachment. And it's an interesting distinction. I think I'm here. I love our president. I think he's doing great things. When the distinction here is Jocelyn Benson is breaking statutory laws. She's violating the U.S. Constitution. She's violating state statutes with what she's doing. I mean, what happened in Washington, whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, they impeached on a legal contract that two people executed with each other, and said that I guess what it was election. They were trying to claim some type of election fraud,
right,
on campaign finance. This is not. This is much more serious. This is about our elections. She's breaking the law in running our elections. What could be worse? I said to somebody this morning, I said, other than the government's role to protect its citizens from being killed, the next highest responsibility is to run the elections fairly, so that we actually know when we choose who our leaders are, it was valid, it was real, it was legal. she's skirted all of those and full frontal assault on the presumption of validity of signatures. I mean, that's not just skirting, that's just making up new law. She's telling the clerks, hey, presume it's valid. Well, what are you going to do if you're the Monroe County clerk? Secretary Benson, I don't think you're
Right.
following the law.
Right.
She, my clerk is already persona non grata, and that's what happens when you are a Republican clerk with a Democrat Secretary of State. You're automatically going to have a strained relationship because that we're not making it political. We're saying we just want to know whatever the votes, however they go, we can accept the results. We just want it to be fair. We want it to have integrity. If we lose fair and square, then we got to go back. We got to go back into the public square and say, okay, we got to win hearts. We got to win hearts and minds.
I always, when something like this happens, I always say, well, what does history say about it? And it was just fascinating learning that 1894, Governor John Rich actually removed a Secretary of State and two other people who were on the State Board of Canvassers because in the previous year's election, this was like a April 1893 election, they passed false election results. They said that this amendment to raise pay for offices, including theirs, had passed by 1,800 votes. The certified results actually proved that it failed by 11,000 votes. And when it all went wrong, they blamed the clerks and said it wasn't intentional. We weren't doing it for the money. We just messed up. We came into a room, whatever numbers they said were the numbers, we just rubber stamped it. And so it wasn't, we weren't corrupt. We were just negligent. And the governor, John T. Rich, actually removed all three from office, including the state treasurer, for gross negligence. So there is a historical precedent for this kind of thing. But what you're saying is the theme I'm hearing is that elections have consequences. When you don't have a governor who would take action on something like this, even when it's egregious, because they're in the same party, and you don't have a attorney general who might take whatever legal action because they're in the same party, and the Supreme Court, same deal, same party. This is the only recourse you have.
The framers of our Michigan Constitution, they knew that this was a potential, that this could happen.
Yeah.
Politics being what it is.
Yeah.
And so there is one final relief that we haven't talked about, but it's not practical, really, not on a statewide level. And it's recall. And you saw that with Governor Whitmer.
Worst idea ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because then Whitmer was able to give that money that she wasn't able to keep to her Democrat friends, and they ended up switching the legislature to Democrat.
She became Daddy Warbucks.
Crazy.
That's really not a practical solution, and I don't even know if it would ever happen. You'd have to have the amount of money you would need to spend. We are the elected representatives of the people, the House of Representatives and the senators. Yeah. It's our job. If something was really, if someone was breaking the law, and the attorney general and the courts would not do anything about it because it becomes political, they're afraid to touch it. It's our job to step up, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, and say, no, this is a clear violation of the law, and this person should be removed from office. And I'm sure there's examples throughout history, as you mentioned. This one, I don't think in my lifetime, I call Secretary Benson the most lawless Secretary of State in Michigan history. And I think that that's true. She's disobeyed, skirted, and full frontal assaulted so many laws that I don't even think it's arguable when you look at the things that she's made up. Mm-hmm. Presumption of validity is nowhere in the law.
And that's what that guy in 1893 did. John Joachim, the Secretary of State. I'm just going to presume that these numbers are right. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't your job constitutionally. It was to verify, not to presume. Presumption is not the job. It's a dereliction of your job. And so when you give that order, you're saying, I've given an order for people to not do their job.
Yeah, that's saying trust but verify.
Right.
or
not trust in lieu of verifying.
Yeah, in politics, you would say be suspicious going in because
Yes.
you would maybe have some suspicions that there could be problems. I am going to verify and then certify.
Mm-hmm.
And if you verify and certify, then that tells me that you did your job.
Right.
And that's our job as legislators. That's her job as the head election official. It's every county clerk. My county clerk takes her job very seriously. She goes,
right.
I am not accepting any results from my townships that don't balance. They're going to balance. If they don't balance, we're going to have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when you look at the places where we always have the problems, the precincts don't balance. The numbers are off. And you're like, where did these ballots come from? How come the amount of ballots that were issued and the amount of votes counted, they're just the numbers are off. And if you look at Patrick Colbeck is a great resource to me when it comes to the
former senator.
Yes, and he knows election law backwards and forwards, and he's been really good. When they saw those 127,000 votes that was corrected in the 2024 election, he's like, those are all fraudulent votes. I said, how do you know? He goes, there's no numbers corresponding. He goes, they immediately changed it changed. And I'm not technically up to speed to tell you how they can identify that these votes were all like they're getting ready to stuff the ballot. And I'm like, Patrick, he said, we know from looking at the poll books, voter history, the qualified voter files, the amount of people registered, and there are so many problems. I mean, we could talk about this for a long time. There are so many problems with people who are deceased on the voter rolls. What was it? There were some that were removed, and she ordered them put back on. There's people who have moved, and
he doesn't want the voter rolls to be lean and clean, and it just has to be asked publicly because the media won't do it. Why would that be? Why would a Michigan election or chief election officer not want the most accurate voter rolls possible? How did we get to this place of this expansive, we are the world, come one, come all? That's not a principle of government.
Why would a gentleman come to me and testify that he was in prison in Toledo, Ohio, and somebody voted in his name in person in Detroit? He was so upset that someone voted in his name, and we had 3 or 4 people come before us and testify in committee. But there's been so many examples, again, anecdotal examples, like how does somebody vote in somebody else's stead when that person, like I voted? Yes, you voted in the 2018 election. I was in prison. There's no possible way I voted in person. You could say, well, they voted absentee, but still they can't vote absentee if they're in prison. But so the system has
that's actually terrifying because it indicates a level of sophistication.
Mm-hmm.
Someone would have had to know that.
Yeah.
If they're at that level, how do they ever lose?
Well, the system, without integrity in the system, we can't be sure of anything.
Yeah.
We can say, okay, I think that the majority of the votes are legal. And I would say that's my attitude too. The majority of the votes are legal. The right person is voting and it's legit. The ballot's not being, we're not losing the chain.
But majority could mean as little as 50 plus 1. So,
when you're in
I think we're looking for more of 100%.
Honestly. And when you're talking about elections swinging on 1%, or a half,
be right.
It has to be right on. And we have to have total confidence. And what could be more damaging to our system of freedom than to feel like our elections were not valid, whether it's a state election, a federal election. I think there were so many people with eyes on the locations this last time, it was extremely challenging. I will tell you, I had on election day, my township, I had a neighbor call me and said, "Jim, I'm calling the state police." I go, "Oh, hold on, what's going on?" He said, I got into the polling place, I put my ballot in, and she said, and it said voter number 87, but she said, "Oh, really? 158 people have voted. The feed rolls were broken on the tabulator about an hour in, and we're going to go back in and feed those ballots in later." He goes, "What? I'm actually voter 158, but the machine shows 87." She goes, "Yes, we're going to fix it. And there will be a Democrat and a Republican there to watch as we feed those votes in that didn't go in. We had to hand feed them, so they didn't tabulate." So he said, "I'm calling the police." I said, "Hold on, let me call the clerk." And the clerk said, "Jim, I can assure you this is all on the up and up. We are going to balance at the end of the night. We did have a problem with the tabulator. It wasn't the feed rolls were broken. We couldn't get it to tabulate because we had to push the ballot into the box. So we had to take those ballots back out." And then in the township to the north of me, one of my friends walked in and saw a piece of tape, one of the tabs ripped on the tabulator. And he says, "I want to call the police. The machine's been tampered with." And he took a picture of the machine. And so I called the clerk there and I said, "I got a person who wants to call the police right now. There's your machine. One of the seals is broken on your machine." And she said, "Show me the picture." And I showed her and she said, "That seal is not the seal to the ballot box. That seal actually is not a seal that it means anything. The integrity of the tabulator and the box is secure. Nothing has been broken." She goes, "Don't tell them, please don't call the police. It's just going to make our day that much harder." So this is the level of intensity that we're talking about, all because our head election official doesn't want to follow the law. Everyone is nervous that we're not following the law, that these guidelines, clerks are being told to go ahead and put somebody on the qualified voter file against the rules. And this is why you're seeing in the news that the state House Republicans, yes, we are Republicans, but we are representatives of the people. Don't forget that. I tell people this is a political process. You can't deny it. We are representatives.
You can't detach politics from any of this. Everyone is being political, but I do think it's interesting because I think even within that setting, Jocelyn Benson has taken things to a next level. Like when you look at the Michigan manual and you look at past Michigan officials, the governor, it always tells you were they Democrat or Republican or Whig. But for Secretary of State, it doesn't even tell you which party they are. Because I think there was an idea throughout history that it didn't matter, that they were there to be the chief election official and, the guardian of records and things like that. I think if they were to make a new manual this year, they need to include those party affiliations. These things do matter. It matters who runs your state.
Richard H. Austin was the Secretary of State for me growing up most of my life.
Yeah.
And he was a pretty classy guy. And my dad, my mom always spoke very well of him. And he was a Democrat. And he was a longtime Secretary of State, probably one of our longest serving. And he was not very partisan. He was not a hard partisan person. I thought he was a very efficient administrator of our Secretary of State's office. I wonder, even me being a supporter of term limits, I wonder if term limits may not be the greatest idea with a Secretary of State, that it should be maybe a position where somebody gets into office and could stay for more than 8 years because they're administrating your license bureau. Things that you think of as really not that political, but voting is very political. And the idea that you could get somebody in control of overseeing the voting system and then have that person become a fiefdom unto themselves and say, no matter what you want to tell me, I'm not doing what you're asking me to do. I'm elected. I can do whatever I want. You're like, well, no, wait a second. You can't do whatever you want. There are laws that govern how you have to behave. And there's a constitution. And she's basically just taken that and just put it in the shredder. We could send it out.
So to go back to ninth grade civics, this is checks and balances.
It is.
This is what checks and balances looks like.
when we have a constitution and when we use it properly, that's the other thing I always wonder about as a conservative is, do the courts actually believe that the Constitution and the what it says, are they strict constructionists with the Constitution? Our courts have gone beyond, they're making law. And to me, best example we can give is when Jocelyn Benson says, presume that those signatures are valid, she's making a law all by herself.
Yeah.
She's now sitting as the Supreme Court Justice and the Secretary of State and the legislature and saying, I am the king poobah of elections here. You presume those those signatures are valid,
yes,
or else I am going to come to your office and give you a good thrice over for not operating your office correctly and at my direction to tell you that those signatures are valid. I'm telling you that. When the law says verify the signature, certify your election, certify that your results are what they are. I mean, if we could just get to that point, whether it's Republican or Democrat, we could say, listen, I may not agree with their party, but I think she does a good job or he does a good job running his office. I'd like to think that somebody would say that about me. Like, I'm going to get a fair shake with Jim DeSana. If I go to him and I show him, Jim, here's the evidence, here's what they did, I'm like, this is bad. And they're like, bad? It's a breaking of the law. I'm like, that's bad. And they're like, what are you going to do about it? And I'm like, nothing. I'm a Republican. I'm not going to do anything about it. And they're like, really? Your party defines whether you're going to stand on the side of good versus breaking the law? I'm like, I don't think I could do that as in good conscience. And people say, well, this just all devolves into one party versus the other. I'd like to think that in our system, as you described, the checks and balances they knew that there would be politics involved. And the chances of there being a monolithic force that would ignore all the laws are very slim. That some entity is going to stand up and say, wait a second, I took an oath to defend the Constitution and I took an oath to uphold the law. I can't stand by and watch these egregious violations. I mean, maybe California is that state where it's just basically it's run completely by one party, and that's why you see what's going on in California. I sure hope Michigan, we don't go in that direction. We always joke that we're following California. If we look at the laws we're passing, all the things we're doing, we're just becoming like California. I'm here standing up against that and saying, no, we still have to uphold our Constitution, our federal Constitution. As a state legislator, I take an oath to uphold the federal Constitution too, because that law is supreme in Michigan.
That's our supreme law. And so like that's another thing that history says. We talk about checks and balances. One of the arguments that came up in that case was when the Secretary of State was sworn in, they agreed to a constitutional order where the governor could remove them. They also agreed to a constitutional order where the House could impeach and the Senate could decide on removal. These are all functions of our system. So when people say don't use the tools of the system when they exist for this exact reason, but so that's my thought on it. But how is this being received in Lansing? Because I think about the last few times Michigan politicians have been involved in impeachment efforts. Pete Meyer cost him his job voting to impeach Trump. Sri Thanadar just recently, his stunt did not go over well. Even Democrats were begging him to pull it, and he finally did. How does this not devolve into a stunt?
Well, I'll start by saying Lansing is an echo chamber. It's a little bubble. And it's perhaps the most corrupt town in Michigan. Just our system. When I go to our system we're a full-time legislature. We're one of 10 full-time legislatures in the country. 40 other states are part-time. We're here a lot. There is a lobby corps and a built-up system to protect not only the status quo, but to fight off a measure like some radical conservative would come in and say, we need to impeach the Secretary of State. She's broken the law. They're like, hold on, that's too radical for us. And I'm like, it's constitutional. It's not radical. It's what is called for. And we're not doing our job. If somebody breaks the law, we're not doing our job. So going to your question, I would say that it's an uphill climb. I think that we have a very strong majority of people who would say to you, oh, I agree. She's broken the law. She should be called to account for her violations of statute
in some way.
Yeah, some measure of censure, or we impeached you because you broke the law. And even though the courts would not say you broke the law, or they did, but said there was no penalty, we are saying you broke the law. You violated your oath of office, clearly violated your oath of office. We should say that. And I think most would agree with that. When you get to the area of people who are nervous about doing something that they would tell you, well, let's just decide it at the election. I'm like, oh, and in the meantime, we don't have an officer doing their job, or we have an officer breaking the law. Let's just let them break the law until...
And they're term limited. That election day is not recourse.
Yeah, and Jocelyn Benson will be running her own election. She'll be running the election for governor. And some people have mentioned that to me, and I said, this is independent of that. I think that we're looking backwards. We're looking back and saying, look at all these violations of the law. Look at all these violations of our Constitution. What are we going to do about it? So, it would be phenomenal to me to have 56 to 58 members recognize that these are real violations. These are not fake. They're not conspiracies. There's nobody conspiring, having some theory of that there's a conspiracy out there. These are real violations of the law. And now, I mean, some people might argue that giving $82,000 to someone is more political and less. I don't see it that way. I see that as clearly trying to influence a court case. The presumption of validity, threatening a local clerk, telling a local clerk that she can't perform election duties. These are things that if in a system that was working, our courts would rule on correctly and say, no, Secretary Benson, you are restrained from eliminating the signature requirement. You cannot do that. You can't just say, ignore the signature requirement on the ballots. That's not within your scope of authority. The law says there must be signature verification. You just went ahead and told every clerk, I don't care if there's a signature on there. I'm counting the vote. Go ahead and count it. I can't think of anything, like I told you, the job of government to keep the integrity, to go out and tell the people, here are the election results, and I can verify and certify that these are accurate and checked, correct, and that we have a good system. She can't say that. I can't say that to the people. They're like, can you tell me that you're 100% confident that there's not fraud? I can't tell you that. I think there is fraud. Now, to what level does it rise? How would I be able to prove it? I can't audit. The legislature cannot audit the election. She's the king poobah of all elections. And we're just asking her for her training manuals. I will tell you that there's a belief that there's more to those training manuals and videos that she sent to the clerks in regards to all these problems I'm telling you about, James, that are skirting the statute, skirting the constitutional limits that are imposed upon her. And, but we don't know. We can't even, we're the state legislature. We're the people elected by the people. And we can't get this information. And so at this point, a clear determination that we are saying as elected representatives, you have broken the law, you violated your constitutional oath, and it's clear. It's plain and simple clear. There's not even a doubt about it. We we impeach you, and now you have to answer to the Senate. And if the Senate doesn't want to do their job, I can't speak to that. But if they choose to say we're not going to do our job and investigate this, then that's their prerogative. That's the check and balance that exists within our system. But the House would be doing their job by saying we looked at the articles. These are all true. She shouldn't have done this. The courts didn't hold her accountable. We agree. We send these on to the Senate. Now the Senate can decide whether they want to do their job, their constitutionally granted authority to oversee an election officer who has violated her oath, violated the law. It's pretty simple. I'm a simple guy.
$1 million question, though. I got to ask: do you have the votes in the House?
We'll see. The vote, the articles have to be brought up to the House floor through a committee process. So my hope would be is that we could have a vote on the floor. Typically in politics, you don't bring up a vote on the floor unless you have the votes. And that's the $1 million question. I wish I had the $1 million to answer it correctly.
I think that might be what separates a stunt from the thing, right? There's attempts to ward articles, and then there's votes and action and on the record, and that might be the dividing line. Do you know who would be the 3 House members to try the case were it to go to the Senate, and the Senate were to accept it?
Well, I would hope it would be myself, Rep. Cara, and potentially Rep. Maddock. We seem to be the conscience of the body as far as oversight. I mean, I'm sorry, Rochelle Smith too. Rochelle is very knowledgeable about elections. She knows about all these violations. We shake our heads most days. I can't believe this is our state. I can't believe this is what we're doing. How did things get this bad? You ask yourself all these questions.
Yes.
And to your question,
didn't take long.
No, it happened quick. And with one election, and our state's been going downhill since. And to your question, wouldn't it be nice for every single voter out there to know where their rep stood on holding a election officer or any officer in the state accountable for violations of their oath or violations of the law? Like, what's your vote on this? You go to your rep and say, you don't want to vote on this? You don't want to say yay or nay? I would like to know where my rep stood. This whole thing started for me. I called back in 2020 during COVID. I called my state rep and I said, this is terrible. What's going on? I can't think of anything worse. And I said, what are you going to do about it? And he said, I can't do anything. I said, what do you mean you can't do anything? You have the majority. You have the majority of the Senate and the majority of the House. At that time, the Republicans had control of the Senate, control of the House. And I said, the state health department has no authority to shut an individual business down. They have no authority to do that as long as they're complying with the health codes. He's like, well, they have this fuzzy little gray area where they say because of the pandemic, they can shut a restaurant down, or they can stop a school from operating, or they could stop a sporting event from happening, or they could, all the things that happen, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, you guys are the elected representatives of the people. We didn't have the governor's office. Whitmer was in, obviously. She was the governor, is the governor. And I said, you guys control everything else. You control the budget. You control the laws. You write.
Absolutely.
You can determine. I said, you could stop this all right now. You could stop it. You guys get together. You could stop them raiding restaurants, shutting down barbershops. You could stop it. There's a way you can stop it. And whether that would have been impeachment, I don't know. I don't know if it would have rose to that level. Everybody was running for cover. Even the conservatives were running for cover.
Yeah, so they were.
When my rep told me he couldn't do anything, I said somebody's got to do something. And he was term limited. He went into the Senate, And I said, I'm going to run for state representative because I would not let this happen on my watch. So here I am 3.5, 4 years later.
So COVID was your origin story.
Yeah. My son was on the number 2 ranked rowing team in the country at Orchard Lake St. Mary's. And I said, don't worry, son. Rowing isn't even an MHSAA sport. You're going to go row. It's out on a river. You're going to row. You're going to row against Cleveland St. Ignatius in the national championship. You're going to be good. Only to hear 3 weeks later that Whitmer shut everything down.
Oh.
And I'm like, sorry, son, your season's over. It never got started.
That's heartbreaking.
It was terrible for him to finish his senior year. And I mean, there were a lot of things that happened that were tragically sad. People would say, well, be thankful, Rep, that your son just lost out on a sporting event. I mean, people lost businesses. People lost their lives. Senior citizens were transferred into nursing homes that didn't want to go there. Why am I going there?
But those are all tragedies. Like, we don't have to play the tragedy Olympics. They're all bad. None of it should have happened.
It should have been, you are free to go about the country. You are free to do what you want. My dad told me, my dad's 95. He'll be 95 in October. Wow. And he was told he couldn't go anywhere. He goes, I might not live another year. They can't stop me. He goes, they're not going to stop me from going somewhere. If I want to go out and watch a baseball game, I'm going to go watch a baseball game. And he says, I assume that risk. I will assume that risk. And there was a lot of criticism from the left. Oh, you're going to get people sick. You're going to kill somebody. And here we are in 2025. COVID still exists. Do you hear that anymore? Do you hear that by you going out somewhere, you're going to kill somebody? It's right. It was a gigantic.
It was a psyop. Yeah. It was never true. And we should have been smarter. You didn't have to be an expert on science. You had to be able to read people. And so when you look at Gretchen Whitmer marching with Black Lives Matter, is that something someone would do if they thought they were taking their life into their own hands by being outside? No. Would she? Gretchen Whitmer no doubt loves her daughters. Would she have taken them to D.C. for Biden's inauguration at the height of COVID deaths in January 2021 if she thought she was risking their lives? No, she knew she wasn't. And she was free to make that choice in a way the average Michigander was not free to make.
She had a birthday party. We know all the things she did. She had a birthday party up north at a restaurant. It's that whole Orwellian rules for thee, but not for me. And she knew that there was not a risk to healthy people.
Right.
Healthy people were not at risk. If you had a compromised immune system, yes, there were risks too. And honestly, the worst place you could end up would be in a hospital on a ventilator.
Absolutely.
Very few people came off the ventilator once they went on. They just couldn't overcome it because their oxygen level continued to drop. They weren't using ivermectin. They weren't using zinc and vitamin D like a lot of the people. Early intervention, when people got the virus, a lot of people were getting better quickly. And so why were they fighting that? There were so many questions in my mind that have since been validated. Mm-hmm. And I think this was planned. My dad told me, he says, this didn't spread throughout the world by accident. And so what was done and when it was done, looking back on it in hindsight, we can see how it all played out. I mean, hey, you don't have to go to the polling place. You can just mail your ballot in. And now we essentially have vote by mail without ever having voted on it. I mean, our system basically said, I always thought when you were growing up, I always thought an absentee ballot was for somebody who was either sick, too aged to get to the polls, or on vacation. And now it's just like, hey, vote from the comfort of your own home. And I get it. People will praise the fact that they can look over their ballot. My only ask is take that ballot into your clerk's office with your ID.
Yeah.
You've got 25 days. The election isn't for 25 days. You're going to go out to the grocery store, out to eat, walk down the street. You mean to tell me you can't just go down to your city hall, hand them your ballot, show your ID and say, here's my absentee ballot. Here's my ID. Thank you, Mr. Dixon. The integrity would increase tremendously. if we had, we wouldn't have to have a signature. You would be presenting yourself in person. And then for people who really truly do need to vote absentee, that are out of the country, that are too infirm to get to the polling place, they would be protected. The system would be protected for them.
Yeah.
Versus where we're at right now, which is, hey, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of ballots getting stuffed into this box. And we don't even know, some of them, we've seen the video evidence. I mean, I have friends that have the video evidence of postal workers stuffing, 400, 500, 600 ballots in a drop box. Not legal. That's not legal, but nothing's been done about it.
Jeez.
And we really wonder, like, again, coming back to this, somebody's got to do something. Well, somebody, Jim DeSana and several other state representatives who signed the articles are attempting to do something. And I pat my colleagues on the back and say thank you for having stood up. It's not easy to stand up and say a person should be impeached. It's not easy to do that. I fully acknowledge and grant that when it has to rise to a level of seriousness that would really jeopardize the integrity of our entire system. I can't think of anything else that would jeopardize the integrity of our system than what Secretary Benson is doing. I mean,
let me ask you this, Jim. We'll get you out of here on this one. Another Benson question. This is to me such an oddity, and you're a lot more plugged in with Lansing than I might have missed it. We've had since January a state Senate seat in the Midland area go unfilled. 270,000 people without a senator, and we're about to pass a budget. Have you ever heard Jocelyn Benson, the state's chief election officer, be an advocate for those people and the need for them getting a special election?
Not a word. Not a word. And
how could that be?
And this is a Democrat seat too, by the way.
You're their advocate. You could rightly say, I'm the advocate for all 7 million active voters in Michigan. And so regardless of party, and even like at a time when Benson could benefit from separating herself from Whitmer and showing herself to be her own woman, she's not being the advocate for her voters or doing what's smart politically. What do you make of that?
I think that it would have been very smart for her to advocate for a special election and say, these people have no representation. Clearly the law, even though it doesn't force the governor to call a special election, the law was written that you call a special election when somebody leaves office and is elected to another office. To not do it, it's certainly the spirit of the law. The spirit of the law is that there should be a special election. She could have differentiated herself as, like, I agree with you, that independent person who stands up for what's right, do what's right.
Yeah.
And do your job, do what's right, and say this election should be held. Governor, you need to call a special election, regardless of the cost even politically, right? As people would say, well, a Republican would have done the same thing. I'm not so sure. Not
necessarily. No.
If you were talking to Jim DeSana and the Republican on a seat that, and you said, Jim, what do you think about this open seat? I'm like, we should call an election.
Let's get it filled.
Yeah. I'm prepared for whatever happens. If we lose it, we lose it. If we lose that seat, you could argue, then it doesn't bode well for us going into the next year either. And I think that seat, it's important to remember, the public probably thinks by all the hoopla about this, that was a Republican seat. It was represented by a Democrat.
Right.
Actually, at a pretty good percentage too, James. I mean, it wasn't a close election. I think it was a 4 or 5% win.
A Democrat who was so liked, who traded up from that seat to a seat in Congress.
Yeah.
So no one's saying this is a guaranteed win. It's just notable for its absence, and Benson's silence is deafening.
Why would we not do the right thing and have representation for every district in the state? And just because there's one district that might not go our way, we egregiously violate the spirit of the law and we leave it open for, oh my goodness, this is probably going to be some type of a record, right? This is going to probably set a record in the state of Michigan.
It is.
I'll have to look back through history.
And they could. We just had the May millages that went badly. They could have done this in May. Someone could have been in the seat already.
Yeah,
This could have happened, and these are all choices that are made by Gretchen Whitmer, the retiree, and and no pushback from Jocelyn Benson. Just a bizarre state we live in.
it's bizarre. All three administrative positions in our state, we could go into great detail. They've all done things that violate law and violate the spirit of the law, and they've exceeded their authority.
Mm-hmm.
And who are the ones that are supposed to call them to account when they exceed their authority? But the elected representatives of the people in the body called the legislature.
Yeah.
So here we are. We are the legislature. I'm trying to buck up my colleagues and say, listen, you didn't come here for dinners and platitudes and handing out flags at nice ceremonies. You came here to fight for the right thing, fight for doing the right thing. That's what I'm doing. That's all I'm doing. I can't express that to you enough, that if Jocelyn Benson were operating like Richard H. Austin and doing the right thing, I would be praising him and praising her and saying, listen, you're doing a good job. You're not in my party, but I respect you. I cannot have respect for a person that invents things out of thin air that violate our law. That's the bottom line.
Absolutely. Jim, thank you so much for taking the time today. Where can people find you on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter, State Representative Jim DeSana.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking the time today, and God bless.
God bless you too, James, for everything you're doing. Keep up the good fight, man.